Plans for a ceasefire in the Ukraine war lie firmly with Russia. After a tentative deal was struck between the US and Ukrainian officials, the countries agreed to a short but immediate 30-day pause to the conflict in their first official meeting since the clash between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky at the end of last month. It's now down to the Russians, who have so far opposed anything short of a permanent end to the war and hasn't accepted any concessions. I'm joined now by Russian security expert Emily Ferris. Now, Emily, this war has been going on for 3 years. Is talk of a ceasefire welcome news for the people in Russia?
Judging by some of the comments of people on the street, I think people are a little bit concerned that any kind of ceasefire might not be in Russia's favour. And I think that's kind of what's on the minds of the Russian senior leadership at the moment. And that's why you see them be a little bit circumspect about their response to any kind of deal on the table.
And how is all of this being reported by state media?
I think with a huge degree of caution. I think there was a bit of temptation, I think, when Trump first came into office. There was a lot of reporting that Russia was, I suppose, a little bit gleeful about the prospect of a Trump administration. But actually, I think certainly among senior leadership, certainly amongst the official media channels, there's a lot of caution and wariness about perhaps some of the more unpredictable nature of Trump's leadership. For the Russians, this is somewhat putting them on the back foot a little bit. They're rather more used to being the belligerent party, and it's rather difficult for them, I think, to try to predict a little bit what America's behaviour might be. And I think that's making everybody a little bit more nervous.
And what do you think is the likelihood of Putin accepting this deal?
Well, I think the Russians have been quite clear that they don't know quite what's on the table. So their responses at the moment are all very muted. Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has been, I think, quite unequivocal in his comments, which are that Russia has not got anything to say for the moment because the details are not clear to them. They believe that this is something that the Americans and the Ukrainians have hashed out together. I think they're concerned that it might not be on terms favourable to Russia. Putin doesn't really tend to make rash decisions quickly or be pushed into ultimatums and made to make a decision fast. I think this is exactly the sort of thing that would take him quite a bit of time to think about. So what I think we can expect, at least in the next few days, is the Russians trying to delay, to regroup and try to rethink a little bit their response to this.
And is this a straightforward process? Could we see it becoming more complicated?
I think nothing about this war is straightforward. And I think it's a bit of a mistake to imagine that this is going to be a linear process in which we've got a ceasefire and then, say, the introduction of peacekeepers, whatever form that might take. I think it's going to be quite a messy process, and ceasefires tend to be, violated quite quickly in all sorts of conflicts. And I can't imagine that this is going to be straightforward at all.
And how do you think people will feel and what the mood will look like as we head into the medium term and even the longer term?
Well, I think there certainly is a bit of war fatigue in Russia. There's, the economic pressures of the war. Some people do link that to the war and I suppose the necessity of sacrificing the economy for the greater good of the battle. There are some people which tie this to mistakes that are made by senior leadership. This hasn't quite really, translated, I suppose, into protest action or, groups that are presenting themselves against the Kremlin. And that's partly due to quite a repressive political environment in Russia that makes it very difficult legally to gather, or freedom of speech, or even sort of negative comments against the Russian armed forces are sort of heavily discouraged, and there's a lot of legislation supporting that. But I think there is a degree of war fatigue, and there is a temptation. I suppose there's always been the argument that Putin is trying to position himself as the peacemaker and the one that is willing to come to the table. And that's certainly a narrative that the Kremlin was pushing for the last 18 months, which is that it was Zelensky that was the unreasonable party, and that it was Russia that has been pro a deal and pro negotiation. And now, Putin is in the situation where he is being confronted with that exact reality where there is a deal on the table, and it now looks as though Russia is the intractable party. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he can navigate that.